Oh, I was just about to say something controversial. All right, I'm here. We're live. We're live. Hello, everybody. This is Tom Linsky. And we've got Matthew DeWinkler, who is operating the switchboard, but not feeling too hot today. And we've got Kyle Hudak here just to join us. So we're going to be talking about people who were on the Titanic today. For Titanic week day 2, we're going to be talking about people who were on the Titanic and for one reason or another have been blamed or perceived negatively. And, well, in a lot of these cases, we've found that that's just simply unfair. So we wanted to spend a whole live stream podcast talking about that and just kind of working to clear their names, or at the absolute least to give you guys an alternative point of view so that people can make an educated assessment on these characters, these historical figures, as opposed to just going with popular opinion and accepting that as fact. So we are live, right, Matt? And just good. There we go. All right. Cool. I just turned it on. Now I can see we have 200 and about 40 people tuned in now. That's cool. And cool. All right. Sorry if I sound a little flustered. It's been a long day. I got back from the gym and yesterday was exhausting. Not trying to make excuses. Just, you know. All right. Why don't we jump on in? Right now, before we start, I want to just say, I'm looking at the comments right now, and I want you guys to just throw some names at me. Who are some people that you've heard of who have been seen as villains or cowards or looked down upon regarding the Titanic disaster? Throw some names at me, and I've already got a list of who I want to cover, but I want to see if maybe there's anyone I can cover real quick, or if I'm not thinking of anyone, or just if you guys are thinking the same people I am. So just type some at me. Let's see who we got.
There's a lot of Ismay.
Yeah, there's a lot of Ismay here. Astor. Why Astor? I've never actually heard anything negative about John Jacob Astor. It's very interesting that his name is popping up. Ismay, Murdoch, Phillips, Stalin. Oh, well, he kind of deserved it. Wow. All right. Lightaller, J.P. Morgan, Fleet, Murdoch. Yeah. All right. Okay. Got it. Thanks, guys. Calm down, everybody. Oh, my. It's getting out of control here. Okay. All right. There's actually a lot of names there that I plan to cover. So, cool. All right. There's Astor, though. Hang on. I'm sorry. That catches me off guard because I've never actually heard anything negative about Astor. Matt, Kyle, have either of you heard anything negative about Astor, apart from the fact that he was kind of much younger?
Maybe just that controversy, or because he was wealthy. Maybe because he asked to get into the lifeboat as well.
Well, he asked. Nothing wrong with asking. But, yeah, all right. Let's talk about Astor's story first. Get that out of the way. John Jacob Astor was the richest man on the Titanic. I believe he was actually also the 4th wealthiest man in the world at the time. I might be wrong about that, but he's definitely up there as one of the wealthiest men in the world. He owned, or his family owned, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City, which is actually where the American inquiries took place prior to shifting down to Washington, D.C. and taking place in the Senate building. He was an inventor. He was a military man. He had a lot of background that was actually quite notable. But I've never actually heard of him doing anything too controversial on the Titanic. When the Titanic was sinking, he took his newlywed bride, who was 8 or 9 months pregnant. He took her to Lifeboat 4, which was hanging from the davits on the port side just off of A deck. He loaded her in through the open windows, and Second Officer Lightaller assisted. And then John Jacob Astor turned to light hauler and said, "May I accompany my wife? She's in a delicate condition." He said no. Men only. Women only. Women and children only. And he didn't put up a fuss. He handed his gloves off to his wife, said, "I'll see you in New York." And she said, "Can you go find our dog?" And legend has it that he spent the rest of the sinking looking for the dog that they had, and actually may have released all of the passengers' dogs from the kennels to give them a bit of a fair chance to try to save themselves, and some of them actually did save themselves. He struck out into the water when the ship went down and died, along with his dog. So I don't think there's any controversy there. So I just wanted to touch on Astor because it caught me so off guard to see his name mentioned more than once here in the comments. Let me just run through the list. Captain Smith is going to be one of the biggest figures who I'm going to try to deflect some criticism off of tonight. Between he and J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director of the White Star Line, ultimately in layman's terms, the owner of the Titanic, those two really bear the brunt of all criticism of the Titanic disaster. They blame Captain Smith for sailing recklessly. They blame Ismay for putting Smith under pressure to speed up through the ice fields and try to get to New York a day in advance because that's irresponsible. And they blame them for ignoring ice warnings, and they also sometimes blame Jack Phillips, the chief operator, for not delivering an ice warning. We're going to talk about all of this. They also blame Bruce Ismay for not having enough lifeboats on the Titanic. And ultimately, what really seals the fate for Ismay as being depicted as a villain is the fact that he saved himself, that he stepped off into a lifeboat and he survived the sinking. At the very least with Captain Smith, he went down with the ship. So people still say that, yeah, he made a lot of mistakes, but he stuck with the ship and didn't try to save himself. So they give him a little bit more slack than they tend to give Ismay. Thomas Andrews, the chief architect of the Titanic, a lot of people like him, so they have a lot of sympathy for him. But some people still give him a hard time because he could have fought harder for more lifeboats. Some people blame him for faulty construction or faulty materials in the Titanic. But just as Captain Smith, he didn't try to save himself either. So it really bears a lot of the brunt. Now, everything I just said is popular opinion. But out of everything I said, practically none of it's true. And that's why we're having this podcast. Are you guys ready to have your mind blown? I am. Let's jump right on into this. Are you? Good. Kyle? Yes. Good. That sounded very enthusiastic, if not slightly dead. But, all right. Where to begin with these people? And we do have more people to discuss. I go into some passengers, some of the officers, and even some people who weren't even on Titanic during this podcast. But I'm going to tackle these guys first because they're the biggest. Why did Titanic only have 20 lifeboats on board? Why did Bruce Ismay choose to give the Titanic the bare minimum amount of lifeboats? Well, let's take it right there. It wasn't actually the bare minimum. The bare minimum was 16 lifeboats. They made the law based off of the weight of the ship. And they said if you have this much weight, you have to have this many seats in a lifeboat. So let's talk about what a lifeboat actually is. The concept of evacuating the entire complement of people on board a ship into lifeboats and sitting out on the water until rescue arrives was not the concept that anyone even thought of at the time. They just came out of the 1800s. And in the 1800s, if you're on a ship and you have trouble, you're lucky if anyone survives. But now it's 1912. Ships have wireless telegraphy. Almost every ship that's doing the transatlantic run has a wireless machine. They have specific routes that every ship takes, and within a few minutes, another ship will be along. So the idea is you're not going to use the lifeboat to evacuate everyone. You're going to use the lifeboat to ferry people off of the stricken ship and onto a rescue ship, which would certainly be called very soon and arrive very soon because they're all in the area. That ship arrives, they launch their lifeboats, and the two ships' sets of lifeboats go back and forth until the entire sinking ship has been evacuated. That's it. Titanic was not able to handle any more lifeboats whatsoever. Structurally speaking, it didn't have the launching capabilities. It didn't have the proper davits. It didn't have a decent place to store these lifeboats. There's nothing really more that they all could do. But even in the situation of the disaster, the last two lifeboats from the Titanic had to be floated off. They didn't have time to launch them. So more lifeboats, and our advisor, Park Stevenson, he'd be able to articulate this argument far better than I could. But he ultimately says, had the Titanic had more lifeboats, more people would have died. It would have taken longer to get the extra lifeboats out of the way, load up the outermost lifeboats while having to walk passengers who are cold and frail and tired over the lifeboats that are extra into these boats, swing them out, and launch them. Then bring the falls back up and launch the next set of lifeboats. That would have killed more people because they didn't have enough time nor crew to launch these boats away. So what I'm ultimately getting at here is this was evaluated when they were building the Titanic. The designers and Ismay were not idiots. Andrews was not an idiot. And the Board of Trade, who was the British organization which basically oversaw the shipping, they came in, they looked at Titanic, they looked at Olympic, the near identical sister ship, and they approved. They said, great, this is perfect. These guys aren't idiots. These guys aren't careless. These guys are anticipating the worst case scenario that they possibly could. And unfortunately, for the 1,500 who were lost on the Titanic, the world simply couldn't anticipate the Titanic disaster. In the previous 2 or 3 decades prior to the Titanic disaster, only about 9 people were killed on the entire transatlantic route. They simply believe we don't have these problems anymore. It's like in modern society. There's a lot of problems that are actually still present to us that seem so foreign and seem so in the past that they're overlooked. And it's the same with the Titanic. They think that they simply thought it's not going to happen. And you can't fault them because we're looking at it from a modern standpoint. We're looking at it from the era, from the eyes of the era that knows the Titanic. Everyone knows the Titanic by name. So we have a bias because we know what happened. But when you're building a ship and you expect all of these circumstances and you genuinely have evidence and you genuinely have experience that says otherwise, that this disaster is not going to happen, and if it were to happen, rescue ships would be there, we can't fault them. It sucks. It's a sucky situation. But Titanic had the proper number of lifeboats that was agreed on. And a lot of people like to say that the laws were out of date. Titanic should have had more lifeboats because the laws were out of date. Well, those laws were updated just 1 or 2 years prior to the Titanic, specifically for the Olympic class. And they were still approved. So you can't blame Ismay. At least not for the lifeboats. Now let's jump on to the next controversy regarding Ismay. And that was, let's beat the Olympic into New York. Let's arrive a day early. Let's break the Olympics record. There's a famous scene in James Cameron's Titanic film where Bruce Ismay and Captain Smith are sitting down at a table in the reception room, and they say, what? Oh, I can't even quote the scene. But just what a glorious end to your career if we get into New York a day early or something like that.
Close enough.
Close enough, thank you. Well, there's no actual record of that happening. One passenger says it happened, but there have been so many lies made up about Ismay by passengers who have never seen it. And I'm not accusing her of lying. I'm just saying there's only been one witness to it. However, there's evidence on the contrary. In order for a ship to go full speed, all of her boilers have to be lit. Titanic never went full speed in her entire career, as far as I'm aware. Maybe during the sea trials. But Titanic never went full speed during her voyage. In fact, by the end of the sinking, that was the first time they actually turned on the final boiler room. Because they needed it to get the power going when the water was flooding out the rest of the boiler rooms. So how could Titanic be going for a speed record when she's not even going full speed? So I honestly just think this is an urban legend which makes the story more exciting, and it gives us someone to hate. Captain Smith is in charge of the Titanic. We know that. It's obvious. He's the captain. But the popular culture opinion is that he was pressured by Ismay, the owner, and ultimately gave in. That's not how a captain would be. That is not how a sea captain of the greatest ship in the world would be. And he would not risk the safety of his ship for the sake of pleasing his boss a week before he retires anyway. He's not going to do that. I can't say this with 100% certainty. None of us can. But it just... I don't know. You get what I'm saying. Matt, do you agree?
Yeah, this is something we've discussed before a lot, so yes, definitely. We've said it, we talked about it before in past podcasts as well.
I know, but now we're consolidating all of these controversies into one. I'm going to cover it in detail as best as I can. Let's take a look at Chief Telegraph Operator Jack Phillips. I played him in a film, and I always really enjoyed the story of Phillips and Harold Bride. So I'm partial to this, and I've done extensive research on who he was as a person and what happened that night. And I feel like Phillips and Bride are the ones I've researched more than anyone else on the Titanic. They were telegraph operators. They were young. Phillips was my age, 25. Harold Bride was 22. Actually, Phillips just turned 25 on the Titanic. His birthday was celebrated on the ship. And they were doing their job. The job of a telegraph operator is not to do ship-related messages. They're an employee of the Marconi Telegraph Company. They're not an employee of the White Star Line. And therefore, their job is to relay passenger messages. Now, of course, because they're on a ship and because they're officers of the sea, yes, you give priority to ship-related traffic. If a message comes in from the captain of one ship directed to your captain, you deliver it, and that gets priority. Absolutely, that's the law of the sea. But their ultimate responsibility is to the paying customer, the paying first-class passenger who is willing to send a telegraph. I assume second class probably could have sent a telegram too, because they did have their own purser's office as well. But that's their ultimate responsibility. Ice warnings started coming in very early in the voyage. I believe it was actually on the first day out. They started receiving their first ice warnings. Ice in this position, look out, we're surrounded by bergs, we're seeing all of this stuff. And they delivered that message to the bridge. The biggest accusation against Phillips is that there was a vital telegram that came in, and it said, ice was in this position, and we're stopped. So basically warning that there's ice there. And Second Officer Charles Lightoller, the highest-ranked survivor of the disaster, he testified that had Phillips delivered that message, Titanic would have avoided the iceberg. That's the accusation. Well, the first message comes in, he delivers it. The second message comes in, he or Bride delivers it. Bride is actually the assistant, so Bride's technically the runner. So most deliveries would have been done by Bride. Third message, delivered. Fourth, delivered. Fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way up to, I think, the 13th message. And they were all saying the same thing, more or less. Different ships reporting ice in the same approximate area. They were all delivered. They all went to the captain or the officer on watch or anyone like that. And the captain ordered the ship is going to now go off course and sail, 20 miles to the south?
I believe.
Matt?
Yes.
Something like that, yeah.
She went north and southern to avoid
Let's
the
take
ice.
Yeah, they'll avoid the ice because the ice is all coming down from Greenland. So we'll just sail south of the ice. 14th message comes in. It says the same thing, so they don't deliver it. The reason they don't deliver it is because the machines broke down the night before. I'm not going to go into detail. This is an entire interesting story, and we actually specifically are going to be discussing it in tomorrow's podcast. So make sure you tune in at the same time, and I'm going to talk about the telegraph breaking down. But it was down, and they have a backlog of passenger messages. So they got to send these out, and all throughout the day, they're sending out passenger messages. Phillips is staying awake. He's sleep deprived, and Bride is doing everything he can to help. And then a message comes in saying the same thing as every other message that he delivered. So he doesn't deliver it. The end. Nothing more would have been done. They already thought that the Titanic had adjusted properly, and the captain thought the Titanic had adjusted properly. So to blame it on the lack of delivery of that 14th ice warning, and again, my number might be wrong. It might have been the 13th. It might have been the 15th. But that final ice warning not being delivered ultimately does nothing. So come on, guys. Let's look at this logically here. You can't blame Phillips. You can't blame Bride. Lightoller accused them, and I don't want to bash Lightoller, but I do tend to have a habit of doing so. Honestly, I think he was trying to protect the White Star Line. Here he's blaming the two telegraph operators who don't work for the White Star Line. If you can blame it on the people who don't work for your company, well, then your company's fine. So I think that Bride probably mentioned in passing that we've got all of these messages, we delivered them, but then one more came in and we just didn't deliver that. And I'm sure Lightoller found out about that and kind of just capitalized on it. I'm not knocking Lightoller. I'm just saying I think that's what happened. So Phillips didn't do anything wrong. He did tell the Californian to shut up, though. At about 7 p.m. on the night of the disaster, Phillips is exhausted. Phillips is about to pass out. He's weary, he's weak, and the way that the telegraph machines work is you have one frequency. I believe you have one frequency. So you hear all the traffic that's going on in the airwaves. You hear, if two ships are talking 100 miles away, you hear them. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. So you hear all of that chatter. And the further away the ship is, the quieter it is. So in order to hear a ship...
Sounds correct, yes.
Yeah, in order to hear a ship...
They always talk about like how loud it is. They're right on top of each other.
Well, getting to that, actually. In order to hear a ship that's far away, 700 miles away, you have to raise the volume on that machine all the way up to the max. You gotta bring the amplifier up to 11. And you're listening, and you're pressing the headphones up to your ears. Whereas if a ship was right next to you, you could probably turn the volume all the way down, and you'd still hear them. So, as he's talking to Cape Race, which is a land base in Canada, he's sending the messages to there. He's got the volume all the way up, and then a ship 9 miles away blasts in. Hey, we're surrounded by ice, and we're stopping our engines. You should do the same. Something like that. It's so loud that Phillips has to throw the headset off. He says it nearly deafened him. It was so loud because he was pressing his headphones against his ears. He had the volume all the way up. He was trying to listen to a telegraph that far away. And now 9 miles away blasts him. It just made him furious because it was rude, because you don't interrupt either. So he didn't really hear the message. He didn't hear, hey, we're surrounded by ice. He didn't hear that we've stopped our engines, and you should too, because he had to throw it off because it was so terribly loud. The only reason we know what was actually said is because the transcript survives from the Californian and other ships who had the messages that they were transcribing. So he didn't hear that message. But he was furious that someone would interrupt, which you don't do, so loud and so inconveniently while he was exhausted. So he jumped back on, he switched the machines to transmit, and he wrote back, shut up, keep out, I am working, Cape Race. Then the Californian turned their radio off. And you can't blame them for doing that either, because that's standard procedure. They had one operator. The guy's got to sleep, and it was now evening. So he turns his radio off and he goes to bed. Someone's asking, did he really say shut up? Yeah, he really said shut up. That's 1912 accurate. He really said shut up. Let me give you an example of how angry Phillips probably was. How many of you have watched our real-time syncing with headphones on, and it's all silent and quiet, and you raise the volume up, and then they launch a distress rocket? Yeah, they launch a distress rocket. And we made that as loud as we possibly could, literally just for this sake. And literally just to troll you guys. Not really. The reason we did it that way is because it always made the passengers on the Titanic jump. So we wanted to make you jump. But it's the same concept. You're quiet, so you got the volume all the way up, you're listening, it's got you tuned in, and you're very attentive, and then bam. That's exactly it. So you can't blame Phillips. And as I said, you can't blame the captain, and you can't blame Ismay. Let's go on down the list. Did Thomas Andrews really do anything questionable, Matt? Go ahead. Make a popular accusation against Andrews.
Well, he built the ship, so he might have built it poorly, is the only argument I can think of. The watertight compartment argument, if you want to say that.
Okay, the only other argument would be that he didn't fight for more lifeboats, but we just went over why more lifeboats would have been bad. So let's disqualify that and focus on what you just said, which is building the ship poorly.
He didn't build a stronger ship for young Rose.
Yeah, if he just tried a little harder for young Rose, maybe then this wouldn't have happened. No. All right. It's a shame Titanic sank on her first voyage, and we never got to really see how she would perform under a normal career. If only there was a ship that was identical to the Titanic in every structural way, and if only we could evaluate her career to some extent and gauge whether or not that ship performed well. Well, hot dog, we can. There is a near identical ship to the Titanic, and it's called the Olympic. I'm sure all of you know what the Olympic was. The Olympic was the near identical sister ship to the Titanic.
It was the Titanic.
Don't start that. It was built alongside the Titanic by the same people with 100% the same materials, almost the same plans. The only differences were really aesthetics and interior accommodations. Everything else was the same. How did the Olympic do? Well, she had her fair share of accidents.
She did well.
She had her fair share of accidents. In fact, in the first couple of months, she got hit by a destroyer. I listened to the part of the podcast last night that I missed. And Matt, you put it very well when you said that the destroyer had a ram on the front. And it was meant to ram other ships and sink them in battle. And it rammed the Olympic. and didn't sink it. In fact, it did minimal damage to it. It ripped a hole in the side, sure, but they fixed it. That's it. Okay, so Titanic would have been able to withstand a collision with a freaking battle ram. Then let's look at how the Olympic performed in World War I. Well, there's an incident where a U-boat targeted the Olympic and fired a torpedo at it. And the Olympic managed to dodge it. Then fired a second torpedo, and apparently it dodged that. And according to some accounts, it fired a third torpedo and dodged that. In hindsight afterwards, when it was dry docked later, they realized one of the torpedoes actually did hit but didn't damage the Olympic. It didn't go off. Well, the Olympic then took out the sub itself, didn't it? It was the same incident, right? Like the Olympics, was that the same incident where it rammed the U-boat? Matt?
Yes, it was. That was the one where the captain turned her bow towards the U-boat and said, "The heck with you, I'm gonna sink you." And it was the only ocean liner merchant ship to sink an enemy U-boat.
And that's interesting too. It kind of gives you an idea of the maneuverability of these ships too.
Can we just stop and admire how hardcore that really is? I mean, we've got a passenger ship. Sure, it's not serving as a passenger ship now, but ultimately it's a passenger ship. Dodges torpedoes, actually takes one of the torpedoes, and then swings itself around while the U-boat is in retreat, because you can't fire off all of your torpedoes. You have to come back with one just in case there's an emergency on the return voyage of your U-boat. That's standard German naval procedure of World War I. So the Olympic decides, we're going to turn around and we're going to ram it, and it succeeds in slicing the U-boat in half. I had heard more to the story, but it may have been a slight exaggeration, that then the Olympic reversed itself and sliced up the wreckage with its propellers and then picked up prisoners.
I don't know about that.
It did pick up prisoners, though, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Yes, she did. Pardon me.
Wow. All right, so this ship is identical to the Titanic, more or less, which means Titanic could have done all of this. On top of that, the Olympic then went on after the war to have another 10 or so years of a successful career until she was ultimately sold for scrap. Oh, it's 20 more years, wasn't it? Was it taken apart in 36 or 20? 36.
30.
Matt, this is you.
36. Sorry.
Thanks. All right.
35.
So
30s.
So 15 to 20 more years after the end of the First World War, and the Olympic is still going strong. She's out of date, but I'm going to quote Park Stevenson, one of our advisors, and he says this on the Titanic channel, which we also work with. And he says that when people of the time, when naval architects and ship crews of the time would think of a sound, successful, well-built ship, they always thought of the Olympic. Other ships at the time might have been bigger.
Old, reliable.
They asked it. Old, reliable is what they called the Olympic, because she took a beating, and she kept on going, and she had a successful career with minimal issues of her own. A lot of the other problems came from incidents of collision or things like that, but that's not the ship's fault. So ultimately, the Olympic, at the time, was considered the ultimate pinnacle of architecture and naval ingenuity. And that's the Olympic. And let's not forget, she's structurally identical to the Titanic. No ship could survive a collision with an iceberg like that. In fact, a lot of architects say a modern American battleship would hit, if it hit the iceberg the same way the Titanic hit the iceberg, that would sink too. So you can't fault Thomas Andrews or any of the shipbuilders, including Lord Carlisle, Alexander Carlisle, who was the original architect prior to Andrews. You can't fault any of them. So you can't fault Andrews He's blameless, thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add, Matt or Kyle, to any of the ones we've covered before we move on to the next?
To Andrew's defense, nah.
Phillips, Smith, Ismay.
Hmm.
Any of the four?
I'd like to get on to some passengers.
Not quite yet. I'd like to.
Who else do you have to talk about?
I have some crewmen. I want to talk about Murdoch, Fleet, and Hitchens.
Oh, you're
and
gonna be here all night. Okay, go ahead.
You want to do passengers first? It's your call, man.
No, go ahead.
All right. Murdoch was the officer on watch. We can get through these three fast because we're going to go into more detail tomorrow with the collision. But these three were all on duty at the time of the collision. Murdoch was the highest ranked officer on watch at the time. He was in charge of the bridge. Frederick Fleet was the lookout alongside Reginald Lee in the crow's nest, looking out, spotting for icebergs or other ships or any other obstacles that might come up. And Quartermaster Robert Hitchens was at the helm, at the wheel of the ship. So, can any of those three be blamed? Well, they certainly can be blamed because they were blamed, but it's not fair. I'm trying to think of how much we want to go into it versus save for tomorrow, which is all about the collision. You know what? Let's save these three for tomorrow. We want to jump into passengers?
All right. Do you have any other crew members then?
No.
Okay.
Not of Titanic. I have three passengers to discuss, and then two who are off of the Titanic. So, going into passengers. First one is Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon. Now, I don't know why, but suddenly for the past week or so, we've been giving these two a lot of attention, or at least I have. Perhaps that's because of the fashion consultant coming on, because I was talking to her a lot about their story, and she discusses it in the video, which we're releasing tomorrow. She talks about the Duff Gordons. So I don't want to steal her thunder on that, but they were mainly accused of bribing to have their own private lifeboat. Ultimately, here's what happened. When the Titanic was sinking, First Officer Murdoch was getting most of the lifeboats on the starboard side, clear of the ship. Most of the passengers were hanging out around the aft set of lifeboats. That's just where they mostly were. The forward lifeboats were technically in crew space, so not too many passengers walked forward unless they were ushered forward. Whereas the aft lifeboats were in second class, and first class ventured back there quite often too, and third class, in order to get to the boat deck, you had to come through second class. So basically, most of the passengers were, for better or for worse, funneled to the back half of the lifeboats. Whereas the fronts, it was really hard to fill them up. Well, the forwardmost boat on the starboard side, lifeboat number 1, was swung out. Officer Murdoch was there, and there was no one around to put into the lifeboats. There was 4 passengers, all male, and they were mostly American, I think. And he points to them, he says, "Get in." And they got in. Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon, with their maid, come walking forward. They see the lifeboat getting loaded up, and the 2 ladies get in. And then Cosmo asks, "May I accompany them?" And Murdoch says, "Absolutely, get in." So now we only have 7 people in this lifeboat, which can hold 40. There's no one else on the deck. There's no one else within 100 or 200 feet of Officer Murdoch that he can see. He's got to get this lifeboat away, because if any lifeboats go down with the ship, it's a huge shame. It's a big dishonor, I suppose. And the ultimate thinking is, as long as the lifeboats can get away from the Titanic, they can pick up people from the water. So maybe people can come in and they'll be safe. As long as the lifeboats get away and clear of the ship, that's our priority right now. So he wanted to get the boat away as quickly as possible, and there's 7 people in it. So he takes 5 of his crewmen, and he shoves them into the boat too. He says, "It's your lucky day. Get in." They jump in. Now the lifeboat's got 12 people, and they launch it, and the boat leaves with 12. Fast forward an hour or two. Titanic disappears, breaks apart, and disappears, and everyone's shocked. Everyone's in awe and silent. And then Lady Duff Gordon, who obviously she's a first-class passenger, she's a lingerie designer and dress designer from London, and she's really into fashion, which is why she's mentioned in the fashion video tomorrow. And her words are, "Well, Francatelli," Francatelli is the maid, "Well, Francatelli, there goes that beautiful night dress we bought you," or something like that.
Close
Or
enough.
there's that beautiful night dress gone. One of the sailors who Murdoch ordered into the boat said, "Well, it's fine for you. You can afford to buy new ones. But for us, we're lower class. We're hard workers. And as soon as the Titanic sank, our pay stopped." Because that's the policy of most shipping companies at the time. Once your ship sinks, you're not paid anymore. So he said that. He's like, our pay is gone, and we live off of that. We feed our families off of that, and we have a hard time getting by without it. He didn't elaborate as much. I'm trying to prove a point here. And as a gesture of kindness, honestly, for operating the boat properly and protecting the passengers in it, Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon said, "Tell you what, I'm going to give each of you guys £5 compensation, just to help you guys buy new clothing, to get whatever you need, and to get back to home." And it was meant as a good gesture. When the Titanic arrived in New York, some of the sailors who were offered the money and took the money told it to the newspapers. And they meant it as, "Hey, look at this nice gesture this guy did." But instead it was seen as a bribe, because the lifeboat did not go back to pick up more people. In fact, the crew in the lifeboat said, "We should go back. We have 20-some empty seats. We have 28 empty seats here. We can go back and pick people up." But in the screaming chaos of 1,500 people, any lifeboat that goes back could be pulled under. And it won't save anyone. In fact, it'll only kill the people who already were safe in that lifeboat. So the Duff Gordons argued, "No, we can't go back." So that, combined with how few people are on the lifeboat, combined with the fact that Duff Gordon offered £5 to each passenger, or each crewman, and £5 is a lot back then, they were accused of bribing and buying their way into a private lifeboat. And they lived in shame for the rest of their lives, as did every other person on this list who survived. So that's the story of the Duff Gordons. Honestly, it was just a gesture of kindness to try to help out the crewmen who took care of their lifeboat, and basically just to get them back on their feet. And it was misinterpreted, either deliberately or not, by the press. And the newspapers in America and England went crazy, accusing them of bribing into having a private boat when so many others died. Anything you'd like to add for the Duff Gordons?
That's pretty much it. Like everything, the press is the real blame for all of the. I think that's going to sum it up at the end of this. Is that the press of 1912 is the reason to blame.
Nothing changed.
Well, nothing has changed, but the reason for all all the reason why the people back then they had their reputations ruined is because of the press back then. But we'll get to that. So yes.
Fake news.
Yes. Excuse me. This is the real blame.
The next passenger, the only one The only other
I think
passenger
it-
that
I
I
think
actually
it's
have
gonna sum it
named
up at
here
the end of this is the
is
press
second-class
of
passenger
1912
Masabumi
is
Hosono.
1912.
He was the only Japanese man
Well,
on the
it changed,
Titanic.
but the reason for all these
And he
things,
worked for the
the
Railroad
reason why
Company
the
of Japan.
people back then,
And his
their
job
reputation
was to
ruined
study
is
the
because of
Russian
press back
railroad so that they could kind of steal some secrets and implement them in Japan.
then. Yes.
Well,
Excuse me.
after successfully studying the Russian railroads, he went over to Europe and studied French and German and English railroads to try to learn about them. And then he was ordered back home. And he says, you know what, I'm going to take the inconvenient way home. And instead of crossing Europe and Russia again, I'm going to cross the Atlantic. And then I'm going to cross America and Canada and study their railroads. And then I'm going to cross the Pacific back home to Japan. Well, for some reason, there's a lot of echo going on, at least in the comments, but I don't know if there's a delay. Railroads to try to learn about them, and then he was ordered. Matt, do you know anything about this? You know what? I'm
Yeah.
going to take the inconvenient.
Yeah, it's your fault.
And instead of crossing,
You-
how's it my fault?
I'm muted, so it's
I'm
your
going to cross
fault.
the Atlantic. and then
They
I'm
can't hear me
gonna
right now.
cross America and Canada. Oh, they can't hear you. So they hear.
Yes, they can hear me.
Back home to Japan. Do they hear a one-sided conversation that I'm having right now with you? For some reason, there's a lot of echo going on, at least in the comments, but I don't know if there's a delay. How do we fix this? About this?
Yeah, it's your fault.
How is it my fault? Well, wait, how is it?
So it's your fault.
It's gonna get fixed in a moment. Oh, they can't hear you. So they hear. I blame the press again. What, they can't hear you right now? They hear a one-sided conversation that I'm having right now with you. Wow. Okay, I got it, guys. I got it. I see literally dozens of people saying echo. You guys are echoing right now, actually.
Yeah, it's your fault.
How's it my fault? Well, wait, how is this going on? It's gonna get fixed in a moment. So they hear. I blame the press again. What, they can't hear you right now? They hear a one-sided conversation that I'm having right now. Wow. Okay, I got it, guys. I got it. I see literally dozens of people saying echo. You guys are echoing right now, actually. Okay. How are we doing? Well, wait, how is this going on? How are we doing, guys? I blame the press again. How does that suddenly just spontaneously happen? Wow. Okay, I got it, guys. I got it. I see literally dozens of people saying echo. I haven't touched my settings whatsoever. Okay. How are we doing? Well, people are still saying echo. How are we doing, guys? I can't hear it. So, Kyle, how does that suddenly just spontaneously happen? Kyle, I know you're muted, but I mean, like, are you listening to the stream? Are you able to hear what's going on? I see a lot of people blaming me as though they know. I haven't touched my settings whatsoever. Okay. For God's sakes. Well, people are still saying echo. How are we doing, guys? I can't hear it. So, Kyle, how does that suddenly just spontaneously happen? I know you're muted, but I mean, like, are you listening to the stream? Are you able to hear what's going on? I see a lot of people blaming me as though they know. How about?
Something's up because I actually hear the stream and it's muted.
I can't hear it. So
I am. I switched over, but I still hear.
I know you're muted, but I mean, like, are you listening to the stream? Are you able to hear what's going on?
I can hear it coming through Skype. I hear the stream coming through Skype. Something's up because I actually hear the stream and it's muted. I am. I switched over, but I still hear. All right, hang on, guys. We'll be right back. I can hear it coming through Skype. I hear the stream coming through Skype. Something's up because I actually hear the stream and it's muted. All right, let's. I am. I switched.
Yeah, it didn't. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, it didn't. Yeah, it didn't. Wait. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I am going.
Yeah, that's it.
Wait. Here's an odd thing. I have the stream closed, and I still hear myself.
Sorry about that.
I am going.
Yeah, that's it.
So it can't be on my end. Here's an odd thing. I have the stream closed, and I still hear myself. I am going. So it can't be on my end. Here's an odd thing. I have the stream closed.
Can't be on my.
and I still
There's
hear
all sorts of
myself.
weird stuff going on.
I am going. So it can't be on my end. Okay.
Can't be on my. There's all sorts. Maybe somebody's speaker audio is getting.
My friend texted me. He said, just keep the echo going. It's a cool effect.
We're doing this live stream from inside a giant hangar.
They said it's echoing again, which is not possible. I mean, I guess it's possible because they say it's happening. Just quit. Walk away. Kyle, can you watch the comments and see if people are still saying it's echoing? Don't have it open.
Some people are saying gone, no echo.
Ugh. Okay. We didn't even touch anything. Okay.
Yeah,
Literally
people are
nothing
saying,
changed.
It's gone.
Thanks, YouTube. Thank you.
Nothing. Not a single thing. That's awesome.
I don't think it was you. I don't think it was Kyle. I don't think it was me. Because we literally didn't touch anything.
YouTube just didn't want us to have 300 people watching at all times.
Apparently not.
Yep. Oh, we still have 300 people. All right.
Okay.
411 was an inside job.
7-Eleven was a part-time job. Okay. All right. Where the heck were we? Masabumi Hosono. Japanese man on the Titanic. Well, when the Titanic started sinking, he jumped into a lifeboat. He saw the opportunity, and he thought, well, the officers are holding passengers back at gunpoint. If I jump for a lifeboat, I'm going to get shot. If I stay on the ship, I'm going to die. So I'm going to just take my chance. It'll be quicker if I get shot. Maybe I'll survive. And he jumped into a lifeboat, and he made it. As we all know, in Japan, especially back in the older times like that, honor is a huge thing. And as the only Japanese man on the Titanic, and of course at the time of Titanic, Japan was doing everything it possibly could to westernize itself. The Japanese government was bringing in American military, people to train their military, Germans to do their railroads. I guess this is a little after that era, you know, the last samurai era. But the point is, Japan is still trying to westernize itself. And now the Titanic has become the central point of all of Western culture at the time. And their one person who represented their country survived. When so many men and women from America and Britain and so many other European countries died on the Titanic, they were ashamed of him. And they saw him as a dishonor to their country. I don't know the personal details. I don't know if he lost his job or what happened to his personal life or how he was affected. But I do know that he lived in shame and that he never lived it down. I only mention his name because it's a story worth noting. It's a story worth hearing, and while we're talking about people who are ultimately innocent, we're looking at it from a Western point of view. Our team's American. All of our listeners are mostly in America, Canada, or Europe, or some Western country. So we look at it from a Western point of view. We can't really assess it from the Japanese perspective, unfortunately. I can't defend. I can't say anything about it. But from the Western point of view, the guy just tried to survive. And you can't fault him for that. He jumped into an empty seat. He didn't steal it from anyone.
Wait. I wasn't listening. What did you say? How'd you say he got into a lifeboat? He was. I was busy trying to fix his picture so that everyone could see him.
Okay.
I know he was told they're lowering the boat, and the crew said that they needed people to row the boat, and they ordered some other people to get into the boat, and he volunteered to get in with some other crew members.
That's not what his letters say.
That is what his letters say.
Is it?
Yes.
Because his other letters say if I were the target of a pistol shot, it would be the same.
This is BB talked about this on TC. He was ordered into the boat. He was basically ordered in to row the boat, and this is what BB said on TC.
Why are you coding this?
I don't know. I just feel like the need to code things. I don't know what's being allowed to say, but yes.
Okay.
This is where I got the picture from. I literally just watched part of the episode to grab this picture. Anyway, I'm muting myself again.
Okay. All right. Well, then there's that. I've read the letter that says he wrestled with his conscience about being shot, and he decided to take the chance. You say that. Well, I don't know which is right at this point. So I'm going to tell you guys listening the two stories that we're aware of. And you take it from there. In either case, whether he just tried to save himself and didn't steal a seat from someone, or if he was ordered in to row, in either case, you can't fault the man. At least not through Western eyes. So I feel bad for the guy for having to live in shame and be the disgrace for his entire country. So there you go. Kyle, are you watching the comments by any chance?
More or less.
I'm curious what people are saying regarding Hosono's story. Have they heard the gun story or the rowing story? I hear echo. I hear lots of echo.
That's just Kyle.
You seeing anything, Kyle?
Not sure.
Okay. Well, maybe people are just not talking about it. That's fine. That's Masabumi Hosono's story. One other passenger, I don't have his name, but there's a popular story that a man dressed up as a woman to get a seat in a lifeboat. There's a popular story about that. There's no actual real evidence. It was one of those stories that the news really fabricated to give something of interest to the Titanic. And of course, there was a lot of nationalism going on, and there was a lot of rivalry. And I know that all of the British newspapers that talked about this said it was an American. But who it actually was, we do have an identity. I knew details about the guy. Matt, thanks for naming him. Daniel Buckley. He was actually a young Irish boy who fell into a lifeboat, landed in the boat, and was so frightened that an officer would grab him, pull him out, or even shoot him. I believe it was Officer Lowe's lifeboat, right, Matt? Lifeboat 14? I'll take your silence for yes. Lifeboat 14, and Officer Lowe is the one who had the gun, who was firing warning shots into the air and threatening to shoot anyone who jumped into the lifeboat. Well, this guy fell into the lifeboat. Can they hear you now? Okay. What was it, Lifeboat 14, Matt? Okay, yes, it's Lifeboat 14. Officer Lowe firing warning shots into the air. This kid was so scared that he was going to get shot or thrown overboard or thrown back onto the Titanic that he was shaking. And this one woman, an American woman, Lifeboat 13, okay, so not Lowe's boat. This one American woman felt so bad for the guy because he was actually scared, being worried about being thrown back onto the ship at the very least. All the officers did have guns, so he was afraid of being shot. that she tossed her clothing, her dress, her skirt over the kid to hide him. So he survives. I suppose he tells someone, I hid in a woman's skirt. And that's where the story comes from, that a guy dressed as a woman to get into a lifeboat. That's everyone I have for the Titanic. I have two people who were not on the Titanic who we can talk about real quick. But Matt, Kyle, is there anyone you'd like to discuss or add to any of these people who were on the Titanic?
I saw someone mentioned in the comments. I don't know if you want to talk about him. I mean, they mentioned a bunch of people. I don't know. Yeah, they can hear me now.
Okay.
I think they can. He's not really a villain, I guess, but he's just fun to talk about briefly. His reputation was kind of ruined, I guess. Not ruined, but made kind of damaged. Was
Holding this guy up a lot here.
Yeah, well, we talk about him a lot. He boarded the ship in second class and he made his way up to first class.
The Baron.
The Baron. Baron Alfred von Drachstadt. Baron von Drachstadt, right? That was his name. Alfred Norbury. He was a second-class passenger who was really a young kid. I think he was like 22 or something. And he was very flamboyant and dressed up in puffy clothes and fur and wore all sorts of jewelry, and apparently had like a jeweled walking stick. And he wrote all sorts of charming letters to his mother from the ship. And he hated his cabin in second class. It was not nice enough for him. So he complained to the purser until the purser finally said, we're going to move you to second class, so you shut up. I'm sorry, we're going to move you to first class, so you shut up. Yeah. I think he paid an upgrade. I don't think they gave it to him. I think he had to pay, but he went. They moved him, and they gave him a standard D-deck cabin. And he was happy. He mingled with the smoking room men and played cards basically the whole time. And then when it sank, he got into a lifeboat. Not too much happened during the sinking or the voyage that really hit his reputation, as far as I can remember. Correct me if I'm wrong. But most of the stuff that happened was on the Carpathia, the rescue ship, where a bunch of women just beat him up. Basically, he fell asleep in a pile of blankets, and some women survivors from the Titanic needed the blankets, and they couldn't get him out of it, so they like shoved him and tossed him onto the floor, and I think then he hid in a cabin after that or something like this. Anything to add? Is that it? I think that's it. I think that's the full story of Baron von Drachstadt.
I don't know anything else about him, really.
Yeah. Let's jump to the two people who were not on the Titanic.
Okay, who are you talking about first?
I'm going to talk about Senator Smith first. This was the American senator in charge of the investigation, the senatorial inquiry into the Titanic. People don't necessarily fault him per se, but they give him a hard time because some of the questions were outright stupid. And I want to just make a point here. The American inquiry had a very different agenda than the British inquiry. They both lasted about a month, and they both got to the bottom of some very important matters. But the American inquiry was more so about how could this have happened? Whose fault is this? Basically, the problem was, or the problem from the American perspective is they saw Titanic as an American ship. It was owned by J.P. Morgan, ultimately. White Star Line operated it through Bruce Ismay as the managing director. So earlier in the podcast, I referred to Bruce Ismay as the owner of the Titanic. Well, technically, J.P. Morgan owned the White Star Line. He owned the company that owned the White Star Line. So he financed the Titanic and the Olympic. So with all of the American passengers on board too, the American public wanted answers. And Titanic was the first disaster that was covered by worldwide international press. So they wanted answers. So Senator Smith, I think he was from Maine or Michigan, one of the M states. Thank you. He called up the president and he said, what do you plan to do about this? And President Howard Taft says, I plan to do nothing. And he says, well, I need you to approve me to investigate it. And Taft said, all right. So the first few days of the investigation took place in New York City at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, which I mentioned earlier, under John Jacob Astor, who did not survive. Then after a few days, it was shifted to Washington, D.C., and they managed to actually devote the Senate building to the investigation for almost a month. Now, Senator Smith asked all sorts of questions which were at times rather stupid. And people hassle him saying, why are you asking such dumb questions? But you got to keep in mind the two different purposes. The British investigation was dedicated specifically to the Board of Trade and architects and sailors and anyone else who has experience with ships. So they skipped all the basic stupid questions. And they just jumped right into the important stuff and said, what went wrong? How can we prevent this in the future? Is someone at fault? Whereas the American one wanted public answers. The investigation was being published publicly. So he asked questions that any average citizen without any ship experience or any ocean experience whatsoever would understand every last bit of it. Like he asked questions like, what's an iceberg made out of? And yeah, that obviously it's ice. Yeah, that's a stupid question. But he might have been more so asking, is there anything else in it? Would there be rocks? Would there be things like this? He could be asking that kind of thing. And I don't know if he is. I'm just speculating in his defense here. So Senator Smith asked some very basic questions, in addition to some very good questions, so that everyone, the average American or the average anyone in the world who read this with zero experience about the Titanic or other ships would understand every last bit of it. So I just wanted to make note there. That's why he asked some very stupid questions, because he was establishing a groundwork so that the later stuff would be understood. Now, the last person who often gets blamed, and I can't go too into this. I'm not an expert on this subject. I'm really hoping, Matt, you can weigh in. If not, that's fine. But I do want to just say this guy here to give him a bit of a chance. Captain Stanley Lord, captain of the Californian, the ship that saw the lights of the Titanic, saw the rockets of the Titanic, and didn't do anything. Mm-hmm. Well, first, you can't blame the captain. The captain was asleep. No one woke him. Correct?
More or less, yes. When it comes to it, you have to. The argument that I make for giving him a good rep instead of a negative one is that he did all the correct things beforehand and after. I know he didn't wake up. His officers didn't wake up the wireless operators, to see what ship that was firing rockets, for instance, But when he did learn about the Titanic, they immediately sped up. They immediately turned on the engines and went towards the scene. They barreled through the ice field. They went as fast as they could to the wreck site. And before that, they were surrounded by ice. And what does the captain do? He turns off his engines and he stays put, which is the correct, safe thing to do. He did everything safe for his ship, and then when he knew that there was another ship that was in distress, he did head as fast as he could to the place where there was a ship that was supposedly sinking or had sunk. So yes, when he got that knowledge that there was a distress call, he did all the correct steps, but he wasn't informed on that until it was too late.
Right. That's right.
He had officers on the watch who later on were trying to defend themselves, saying that, the captain, we told the captain that there was rockets being fired, and he didn't do anything about it. He was asleep. Well, they didn't tell him that, the correct information about it, etc., etc. They were trying to protect themselves. I view it as. There was they need that. Again, with the press, they needed a scapegoat back when Titanic sank, and he was the one who really got the short end of the stick, especially later on with Walter Lord's book and the movie A Night to Remember. Matt's sick, by the way.
What's that?
Matt is sick. Sorry for the sniffing.
No, you did well. You did well. You said some good stuff, some stuff that I couldn't have said. So thank you. One thing I want to add is just how close they were to the Titanic. 9 miles doesn't sound that far. But, 9 miles doesn't sound that close. But 9 miles is an estimate. No one knows for sure. There's a wide range of estimates. Some of the survivors said they were so close, that this other ship was so close they could see the people walking on the deck. I think that's honestly an exaggeration. But some people did say that. Now, the people on watch on the Californian saw the Titanic. They saw some sort of flickering light from the Titanic. They saw the rockets going up in the air, and they apparently were able to distinguish that the ship seemed to be sitting on a very bad angle, because obviously the ship's going down. They dismissed that. They thought, well, the ship's probably just angled weird at us. It's pointing off onto the horizon, or it's going off over the horizon. They saw the rockets. They didn't think much of it. They saw the flickering light. And what the flickering light actually was the Titanic sending out Morse code light messages off of the bridge to try to contact this ship. And indeed, the Californian replied. They couldn't read it because it was too blurry and it was garbled, and it was just too hard to see. It was just beyond functional range. But they did try replying with their own Morse lights. And they wrote back. I don't know what they said back, but they tried establishing a communication. However, the people on the Titanic who were doing the Morse lights, they all survived. They said they got no response. Now, the Californian is not a tall ship. It's a shorter ship, whereas the Titanic is a tall ship. It's got its lights really up high, so they're able to send out the messages, and the light is able to be seen further away, because they're also brighter on the Titanic, even with the power failing and the lights fading slightly. So the Californian is able to see something, but it's just at the max range that Californian's weaker system, which is lower to the water, isn't seen. So the Titanic's crew never sees it. So the Californian's officers tried something. They didn't watch and sit there with a bowl of popcorn like I do when I read the comments on some of our posts. They made somewhat of an effort. They didn't turn the wireless back on. They didn't really wake the captain and say, hey, I think you should check this out. They kind of, if they did anything, they passively said it. As you said, they passively said, hey, there's a ship firing rockets. The end. And this whole podcast is about clearing people's names. I don't want to ultimately place blame on anyone. I'm not saying blame these guys. It's not what this is about. But I am saying we should look at Captain Lord a little more sympathetic. Because I also think of, what must that captain have been thinking afterwards? He's being blamed for this. The Carpathia is a hero. In fact, the Cunard captain of the Carpathia, Arthur Rostrom, he was the captain of a tramp steamer, for crying out loud. It's almost a tramp steamer. And because of the Titanic disaster and saving the passengers, he becomes Commodore of the entire line, of one of the most prestigious lines in the world. And now here we've got the Californian guy. And I'm not saying, obviously, it's about selfish motivations, but that adds to it. He's seeing this guy's a hero, And meanwhile, that combined with the shame that he's feeling for having doubts about himself and thinking, is it my fault? I should have woke up. I'm sure he lived with that for the rest of his life. I should have got out of bed. I should have tried harder. I should have walked out onto the bridge as soon as they said there was a ship. And I'm sure this tortured him forever. And that is something that will haunt him, or that I guarantee you that destroyed him. I don't know anything else about this guy, but I can guarantee you that destroyed the rest of his life. I can promise you that. And I don't need historical information to back that up. I can guarantee that. So when you're dealing with a situation like this, with such a heavy accusation, with the evidence being so uncertain and the eyewitness testimony being contradictory at best, I just think that we got to be careful with these accusations. So even the captain of the Californian, the ship that did nothing, we got to be careful there too. That's the end of my list. I have no one else to talk about.
Do you think you cleared everyone's name? Or do you think you gave at least some good counter arguments?
I think we did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we did. I can't see the comments. I even closed it on my phone. So I'm not seeing what anyone is saying, because it was just annoying me seeing everyone say echo over and over again, and I had no...
That was a while ago.
That was a while ago, but I'm afraid to open it back up because it might happen again. Even though it wasn't my end, I think. Maybe it was. I don't know.
There could have
But
been.
that's the past.
Mm-hmm. There's still always many other people to talk about in Titanic, but I think we covered quite a few good choices.
Yeah. All right. I don't think there's anyone else to really talk about. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
What's tomorrow?
What is tomorrow? It's the collision.
It is?
And yeah, we're
Okay.
doing a video tomorrow afternoon of the fashion. I guess probably, I'll upload it this morning. It's done. It's been done. I'm gonna upload that tomorrow, and then we've got our collision podcast tomorrow night. Basically, how all of the crew reacted to the collision, what the collision
No,
was
there is
like.
no. Yes, there is. Sorry, I lied.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're not talking about this tomorrow. We're
Yes,
not talking.
you're right. That's it. Yes, that's why I'm
about
confused.
miracles of the Titanic, and things that went wrong, but ultimately saved things. So we're going to talk about that. Collision's the next day.
Right. That's why I'm so confused.
Fashion is still tomorrow, though.
Yes.
Okay. I need a drink.
Okay. Oh, don't bring up your wine. Sorry.
I meant water, but all right.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'll have wine for the next podcast.
I need some cold medicine.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
All right.
Sorry I can't read your comments right now, but it's probably for the best.
Possibly. All right. So yes, tomorrow is our miracles of the Titanic, and fashion part 1.
Fashion part 1, yeah.
Fashion part 1. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. I'm actually looking forward to that. I watched the video. She did a good job on it, and it's cool. I like these little subtopics of the Titanic, like the fashion they wore, or the food they cooked, or just who the people were. I love the subtopics. Maybe it's because I'm so damn tired of the ship, but these little things are.
How dare you say that?
You know what I mean. We're always working on the ship. I'm not tired of the ship, but you get what I mean. I like seeing fresh subject material. All right. Thank you, everyone. Stay classy. Tune in tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel.
It will be, yes.
Yeah. I don't think anyone gets the reference to that.
I do. I get it.
I don't.
Oh,
It's the old Adam West.
yes, it's
Tom
way back in
Hanks.
the day.
Yeah. All right. Maybe I'll watch that tonight. Maybe I'll go watch the Bat movie. All right. Good night, guys. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Recording has ceased.
Jeez. My God.